Hello, everyone, and welcome to another Fireside Chat. It's Dan King here with you as always. A pleasure to have Brandon Fong with us today. On the Fireside Chat series, we talk about how creator CEOs are building profitable businesses and changing the world for the better at the same time. I think Brandon is a great example of that. So very eager to dive in with him today on all the great things he's up to in the world. Welcome, Brandon.
Thanks so much. Thanks so much, Dan. Super excited to be here. I enjoyed the last time we got to hang out, and now we get to hang out some more.
Exactly. So Brandon, can you tell the audience what you're up to in the world and a little bit about you?
Yeah. So I always like to answer a little bit about you question with a little bit of my backstory that leads into what I'm up to today. So a little bit of my background is I'll tell you a quick story, and I want to take everyone back to Wisconsin Hills Middle School. So we're all sitting, it's Mrs. Dentisi's 6th grade classroom. And
I got kicked out of that, I think. They didn't let me stay.
Yeah. Okay. All right. Yeah, no, Dan was kicked out. But we were all sitting there, and I remember very specifically we were working on a project about Egyptian mummification, and everybody's sitting and staring at the clock because in a few minutes, the bell's about to ring and everybody's about to go to lunch. And so the bell finally rings, all students jump up to their feet and run to the classroom, to the lunchroom, I should say. And there's one kid that hangs out behind everybody else that's kind of like slowly packing his bag, taking his sweet time. And if you're wondering who that kid was me. And the reason why I did that, and you might be wondering why would any 6th grader ever procrastinate going to lunch? It's like the best time of the day, right? You get to hang out with your friends. The reason why is because when I would go through that lunch checkout line, I'd have my plastic tray with the chicken nuggets and all that good stuff on it. And I would go through and I would wait behind my friends and I would watch them go through one by one. And as I would approach the lunch checkout line, my heart would start beating faster and faster because when I typed in my student ID, I would put it in and then up on the screen, it would say, Brandon Fong, $0.00. And this particular school that I went to, it was a public school, but it was in a relatively wealthy school district. And so I was always embarrassed by the fact that some of my friends might see that I was on that free lunch program and that I wasn't paying for my lunch. And so I would do all these cute things to try to distract them. Some days I would hide out in the bathroom a little extra long so that there was no line and nobody would see it when I would go through. So I devised all of these strategies. And I say that, I tell that story is because that's kind of what inspired me to want to pursue entrepreneurial growth, to become a creator CEO like the people that we're hanging out with today, is because I just wanted things different. Now, I want to say that with a huge caveat that I still have the world's best parents. Like I grew up in an environment where they were teaching me about growth. They were teaching me about networking. They were teaching me about connection. They used to let me skip school when I was 16 years old to go to local networking events. So they were always introducing me to high level people, but sometimes some of the resources weren't there. But that was absolutely a painful experience, but it's absolutely, when I look back at it now, it's something that inspired me to pursue entrepreneurial growth. And I see the seeds of what happened that was in that story that actually led me to what I'm doing today. So I can skip forward a few years and take you to a little bit more of the modern day, and then I'll let you take this wherever the heck you want to go, Dan, or if you want me to pause, we can go anywhere. But basically, I ended up leveraging these connection skills that I was developing at a very early age. And by the time I was 22, I found myself having run the online business development for a 7-figure online education company called Superhuman Academy. When I started there, actually, Dan has worked with Jonathan Levy, the founders. That's kind of one of the mutual connections that we had there. But I ended up running that, and that was an incredible experience. Jonathan got into a high-level group called Genius Network, a group with really incredible 7, 8, and 9-figure entrepreneurs. And then Jonathan said, I want to make more out of my membership. I want Brandon to come along as well. And so I had this incredible opportunity to be 22 years old, the youngest person in the Genius Network room. And I got to see a long way ahead what it looked like for entrepreneurial success, and it was just an incredible opportunity. And I there's not that many days that I don't think about how blessed I was to be a part of that and learn from these incredible entrepreneurs. But that's a little bit about how I kickstarted. And today I have a podcast, and I'm leveraging those skills and networks that I'm building. I started it last year. It's a top 2% global ranking right now. And I have a podcast agency that I'm launching that leverages those skills and abilities and helping other people to develop high ticket clients and strategic partnerships with the people that they are building relationships with on their show.
Awesome. What a fantastic story. And I love how you've leveraged what at the time felt kind of agonizing and felt kind of painful, and you channeled and alchemized some suffering, some discomfort, right, into something incredible. So would love to hear concretely what this work looks like now. So congratulations on building a podcast so quickly, and now an agency helping your clients with high ticket relationships. Concretize for the audience a little bit more about what does that look like from a business perspective?
Yeah. So what I've found is that there are lots of agencies out there that are producing podcast content, but I found that there's a huge need to create a world-class guest experience. When I started this podcast, I didn't realize or think I was doing anything special. I just had this idea that I want to interview people, and it's in alignment with what I've always done because I do so much research for each guest on the show, because each person that I'm bringing on is someone that I really care to learn about. I have 7, 8, and 9-figure entrepreneurs, New York Times bestselling authors, global negotiation specialists. I had a shark from Shark Tank. I know you had a shark as well. So incredible people. And so I showed up with all this research and gave them an interview and asked them questions that they normally don't get to ask or get to go to that level of depth. And
Yes.
I didn't realize I was doing it, but after time I built up, I had this like 5 or 6 long people naturally reacting to saying, I've been on hundreds of podcasts and I've never had an interview like this before. This is incredible. And at first I was just like, oh, thank you so much. I'm grateful for that. And I just didn't think it was anything special. But then I realized over time that what you do when you develop a relationship with someone, if you have a way of giving first, if you can give them an incredible experience, there are many podcast agencies that create a 30-minute interview, and it's a great interview, but they're like, if you take the time to go a little bit level of depth, a level deeper and develop a true relationship with someone, that's where the incredible relationships are formed. So that's kind of what I view as the USP or the secret sauce that what I'm providing and helping these clients with is not just producing a podcast, but strategically looking at who the right people are. And then how do you create a world-class guest experience where you show up with research and you can actually give them a podcast that they're going to remember instead of all the other times they've been on a podcast and, had a bad experience or didn't remember it at all. So that's what I've kind of identified as some of the secret sauce there.
Yeah, it struck me when I first met you how much you care about people, how much anyone you meet, you want them to feel good. People always remember what is the experience like of meeting someone. We don't necessarily remember their intellect so much or what's sort of special about them, but we remember how they make us feel, right? Mm-hmm. And so I can absolutely see the power in a truly genuine approach to transforming how people feel on podcasts. I think that's beautiful. Would love to learn just a little bit more about what that looks like. So you do some research, right? As an interviewer myself, I'm going to selfishly dig for your secrets here. Yes. So you bring them onto the show and you do some research that perhaps other interviewers haven't done. What else do you do in order to create that phenomenal guest experience?
Yeah. Okay. So there's 2 parts, and I'll let you take this where you want to go with it, Dan. Part of it comes from the moment that you reach out to them. That's really where the whole experience starts. It's like, what is the first connection point that you have with them? Whether that's the email, which I have I have a whole process I teach called the magic connection method. That's really what facilitates the start of a good relationship, is that first impression they get that's before the conversation. But then there's also tons of stuff that I do on the show that I've learned from plenty of the people that have come on. So if it's okay with you, Dan, I'll give you a little bit of flavor of each, or you can tell me which one you want to go with. Okay, so we'll start with, I'll give you a brief overview of this magic connection method process that opens the doors to these connections. So keep in mind, this came from me starting networking when I was 16 years old. I've always been the youngest person in the room. I've always been able to network much higher than any ability that I have. And some of the guests I've had on my show is just like, man, it's so cool to be hanging out with, just titans of industry. And so the magic connection method process is what I attribute that to. So there's 3 parts to it, of this outreach. The first is what I call the hook. The second part is the irresistible offer. And the third part is the no-oriented question. I'll give you guys like a 5-minute version of this. So, and I speak fast, so I apologize if I'm going really quick, but I do 2-hour trainings on this. But this is the condensed version. So the first part of the email is that hook part. And the number one mistake that I see so many people make, and Dan, you could probably open your LinkedIn email inbox or your email inbox and you can find a bajillion of these messages. But the first part that people say, it's like they're kind of like pushing about how cool they are, what they're doing in their company. And it's like, you don't even know why you care yet. You have no reason to care yet. This is a stranger on the internet. It turns everyone off. So what I teach is this process I call the love plus specific formula. So the number one mistake is they start about talking about themselves when you really need to make it about the person that you are reaching out to. So love plus specific, the way that goes is I like to look at a bio. I'll listen to a podcast they've been on. I'll read a part of their book or a description of their book or whatever it is. But I want to give something specific that shows that I actually did the research on them, or it's even better if you have a mutual connection that you can mention in the beginning. So how this might look is like, hey, Dan, I listened to episode 42 of your podcast. I specifically liked it when you asked this question, and when this guest shared it, I implemented it. This has been the impact it's made on my life. Thank you so much for sharing that with me. So like at this point, you're already better than 99% of anybody that's reaching out, because you actually took the time to customize it. And there's all these bots that make it even worse. But this takes time and energy, and you want to show results you've gotten from their advice and mutual connection. How did you hear about them? What did you find impressive about them? Something that shows you did your research. The next part is the irresistible offer. Now, specifically talking about the podcast, this is where you can combine these two things together. If you don't have a podcast and you're listening right now, that's totally fine. There's plenty of other ways you can create irresistible offers. But some things that I might say inside of an irresistible offer, it's like, I feel so blessed to say that I now have a top 2% globally ranking podcast. I'll mention maybe some of the types of guests that are coming on the show, and maybe put some of their authority and credibility markers. And I'll also show the testimonial reel. So those are some things that I would put inside of the irresistible offer. And this is a quote that I first learned from Dean Jackson, who's a marketing whiz. But he talks about how a compelling offer is 10 times more powerful than a convincing argument. So many of the emails that are being sent are trying to persuade or push people to do something, rather than crafting an irresistible offer that makes them want to lean in and hear more about what the offer is. And when you have something like a podcast, and maybe you don't, but there are plenty of other creative ways of doing this. Actually, as an example, going back to our earlier story, when I reached out to Jonathan Levy, the guy that I ended up running the online education for and got me the Genius Network and all that stuff, is I was a college student at the time. I didn't have a podcast. I didn't have any skills or experiences. But what I did is I did a deep dive on all of his content. I did a deep dive on his site, and I came up with a Google Doc with 10 ways that I could add value to him. And I said, hey, I want to do this for you for free. And I refuse to accept payment for it. But like, this is what I can do for you. Would you be opposed to me sending you over next steps to move forward? That's an irresistible offer there. He saw a young, ambitious kid that had written a book, that had done some other cool stuff, and that I was able to add value and support him. So there are plenty of creative ways that you can do this. But the key is that you're making it 100% about them, and you're creating something that is of value to them. So you showed them that you cared with the love plus specific. You've given them an irresistible offer. The last part is the no-oriented question. Learn this from Chris Voss, ex-FBI hostage negotiator. This was the dude that was on the phone when there's a lunatic in the basement of a bank about to blow up the whole place. What do you say to them? But he teaches this concept of a no-oriented question. And the way that he explains it is that every single day we have a finite amount of yeses that we can give. And it takes like a cognitive load whenever you have to make a decision or process something. And especially in an email, when you're skimming, you need easy decisions to make. So that is where this irresistible offer comes in. It's because you would frame the question, instead of saying, are you interested, or can I send this over? Would you, the no-oriented question version would be, would you be opposed to me sending X? And so the way that I love doing this is, like, let's say I'll give a third example. Hopefully this isn't getting too crazy, but let's say I want to get on a podcast. I would say, hey, Dan, I love what you're doing with creator CEOs. And I came up with 3 specific ways that I can add value to your audience. And I put it together in a Google Doc. Would you be 100% up to you, but would you be opposed to me sending over the Google Doc for you to check out? So, and then nothing after that. So it shows that you cared. It shows that you've done work ahead of time, that you want to add value to the audience. And then at the end, you're simply asking, would you be 100% up to you? It's your choice. Would you be opposed to me sending it over? And then you can open the door to these incredible conversations. And then obviously following up on that. But that's what I've found. And that's whenever I write an email, and you'd be surprised, like, I've been able to reach out to really big names and leverage something like this and get them to positively engage in my show. And so, like, that's been incredible. So I'll pause there for a second, not only so I can grab a drink of water, but also, Dan, if you want to ask anything else in there.
I love what you've outlined here. I'm going to speak slowly to give you the chance to drink a little bit of water. I think that's fantastic. And I can just see how easy it is to, especially when you're young, you don't have a ton of experience, and you're in this position where you want to kind of make a life for yourself. You want to make a career for yourself. It's so easy to think about some of the unfortunate things that have stopped you from doing it, or seem to have stopped you from doing it up to this point. And I so respect the hustle of being able to get out of your own head and plant yourself firmly in someone else's world. It takes a ton of empathy to do it. And it underlines for me the importance of how vital empathy is in building connections. And like we said at the beginning, changing how someone feels, really making the experience of them being with you feeling good. And writing emails like that, I have zero doubt that a very high percentage of the recipients feel good to receive an email like that.
Yeah. And you get positive. I mean, even if they don't end up working with you, it's like you did your best to give a great impression. It was about them. You were adding value to them. There's literally nothing that can come wrong from that situation. So there's lots of magic that happens there.
Yes.
Did you want me to keep going with some of it? So that's
Let's
part of
talk
what
about, yeah. Oh, sorry.
Yeah,
go.
so,
I didn't want to cut you off.
No, I was
Go
going to
ahead.
say, so like that's part of what we're doing now is like when you work with us, we're going to be using these magic connection outreaches. So you know that you're developing relationships the right way to get them on the show. These have been strategically identified as either high ticket clients or strategic partners for you. So like that's how we're showing up. Obviously, you want to start with your warm network and all the incredible things. But now let's go into the guest experience, right?
Yes.
So
yes.
There's so many different ways that I can go here, but let me just pull upon somebody that, or draw upon, is my wife always makes fun. I always somehow mess up and I combine different phrases that aren't supposed to be combined. So if I do that, it's just a weird quirk that I have. But anyways, I had on a guy named Michael Haig on my show. Okay. This guy is a Hollywood storytelling legend. He consulted for Will Smith on I Am Legend. He's been, I mean, if anybody has read Russell Brunson's Expert Secrets, he's like, that's lots of what Russell based his stuff off, was Michael Haig's stuff. So Michael Haig's a great guy. And he talks about how Hollywood employs very specific opening scenes. Like obviously the opening scene of a movie is one of the most critical components to the engaging you for the rest of the thing. So I am very deliberate about the first question that I ask people on a show. Like if I'm going to spend my time, energy, and effort anywhere, I like to avoid asking the question, tell me a bit about yourself. I like to go deep, and I like to find a story that I know that they've told in the past that fits within this hero's journey. And I like to drop people right into the story. If you ever listen to NPR, if you ever listen to Hidden Brain, any of those kinds of things, and this, I've gotten recently better at this. This is something I didn't used to do as much, but it's like I would spend so much time setting up the story. But I mean, even and Michael Haig actually helped coach me on that story you heard me tell in the beginning. You'll notice like there's not that much background. It's like I immediately dropped everyone inside of the 6th grade classroom, Mrs. Dentisi's 6th grade classroom. We're all sitting and staring at the clock. Everybody can kind of picture what that scenario is like. Maybe that's not the most highest action, but basically what I like to do is like, I like to either foreshadow a place that the hero ended up, and the hero in this case is a guest. I like to start with a really engaging story, but no matter what it is, I like to drop people right into it. So like I had New York Times bestselling author and decorated air fighter pilot that's flown 65 combat missions. And so like he's got all these crazy stories, but I could easily start off the podcast by saying, you know, you're flying with your squadron, and then you hear over the radio, Pigpen says brake left, and you have a 65-foot telephone pole like missile behind you. What happens next? So you drop someone into that story, the listeners can't help but want to hear the rest of it, but also it shows that you've done your research on that particular guest, that they're actually hearing those elements. So that is probably one of the biggest things that I look for, is like I'm always looking for stories, actionable takeaways, or feelings. Those are like the 3 things that I'm always looking at digging deeper in on a show. And so like part of what we're doing for the podcast clients right now, it's like they get a research doc that shows some of these different ways that they can interject these stories and experiences. And that's what leads to these natural people saying, I've never had a show like this, because it's like you're asking them about very specific components of like what they've done. And that really engages them in a way that they normally don't get to share. And you can kind of skip past the same old stories that they always tell, or at least if you're even if it is a story that they've told before, you've asked it in a way that shows that you've done your research, and that's what shows the most about you as a guest, as a host, I should say.
Yeah. Well, one of the fascinating things that you're doing here, you may be doing consciously or not, but one of the ways that we change how people feel is by activating their emotional memory, right? So when we are in situations in which, in any time you ever want to remember anything, and memory is, and maybe you learned a little bit about this from Jonathan Levy, actually.
A lot of it.
But if you find, if you want to remember anything, if you can connect it to some emotionally resonant memory from your own experience, you're never going to forget it. Yep. You're going to trigger the most beautiful set of sensations in someone. And so some of the best teachers do this. I mean, it's a secret that cult leaders use, unfortunately, often for not so positive outcomes. But the reality is that if we want someone to remember an experience, we want it to really, really stand out for them by triggering an emotional memory. it's exceptionally powerful.
Mm-hmm.
And so by bringing people back to this story that was significant for them, that had such emotional resonance for them, you're bringing them to a beautiful place, and you're building a foundation for phenomenal connections. So I really like what you're doing there too.
Thank you.
Did you want to add to that? Sorry.
No, I guess the only thing I'd add, like, just because you mentioned Jonathan Levy, it's called the Heb's law. Like, neurons that fire together wire together. So like anytime that you can associate a memory, like there's a reason why you're never going to forget your address when you were a kid. It's because you have so many. You have the memory of your mom writing the address on your coat as you hung it up in the cubby in 5th grade. You know, you have like all those the when your parents were quizzing you, like, okay, if you get lost, like what's the address, so you could tell the police officer or whatever. You know, like all those memories are associated with that. So the more that you can do that, and you're right, actually, if you can ask, here's a hack. I'll give you a really quick hack, Dan. This is a fun one. I love doing this. If you skip to the back of a book, there's always the acknowledgments. There's really good stories there. The people that have contributed the most on their journey, they're going to be thanking in there. So if you can say, you know, I've been able to ask really good questions because of that. It's like, you know, they'll say something about their grandma. Thank you so much, grandma, for teaching me this message. How many times do you get to talk about your grandma on a podcast? Like almost never, but like usually that's something where I can like skip to the back, see that they, you know, or I can say a very specific name. You know, it's like they thank Tom, whatever Tom's last name is. And then instead of saying, you know, tell me a story about a mentor that's changed your life, I can say, hey, I think, you know, it seems like Tom made a massive impact. Would you mind sharing that story about how his mentorship has impacted you? So the more specific that you can get with those questions, the more it shows that you've done your research. And as you build this up over the interview, that's what accumulates to this you know, these reactions that you get.
Phenomenal. So now let's go for after the interview. So, you know, we want to build great connections with people. We want to tell incredible stories. We want the audience to be impacted. But when you're working for your clients, ultimately, you're building these relationships to create mutually beneficial business possibilities, right?
Mm-hmm.
So I'm curious, if we think about how this translates from a business perspective, what could companies that work with you, what could businesses that work with you expect you to do sort of on the basis of having built one of these interview systems? What happens next?
Yeah. So I love working with people that have like a very long-term perspective, and they see the value of what, you know, because like lots of these relationships you develop, yes, you can get ROI right away, but like lots of things that have come back to me over time, it's like, wow, I would never expected that to come from anywhere, but like because I had a great interaction with them in the beginning. So I think I heard somebody on my show say this, his name is Tom Matson, but he talked about 100-0. You know, it's like you're always giving with 100%. And you're expecting nothing in return. And so there's lots of different ways that you can engineer creating an experience with that after conversation that you're talking about. One of them is like, that's a perk that people get on my show. It's that I tell them that like, hey, I always ask people at the end, what's the number one thing that you need the most help and support with? If there's any connections that I'm going to make in the future from people that are coming on my show or past guests, I absolutely want to make those connection. So like lots of times it's not always necessarily like, hey, let's do business together, but rather it's like there's, you know, a really good mutual connection that I can make for them so that I can establish and play that long-term game with them. So like those are the things that I'm looking for, is ways that I can continue to add value to them. And then obviously there's a component where you can ask the, you know, say, hey, I noticed in doing my research, XYZ, it seems like, you know, there's lots of ways that we can work together, and you can have a separate conversation about that. But another way to keep in mind is that you're also, the podcast specifically gives you opportunities to have multiple touch points, right? So you have the interview, you have the post-interview process where you can send thank you notes. You can, you know, that's a huge thing. Or I had John Rulin on the show. He's the creator of this system called Giftology. Sometimes I'll come across like something that is related to those stories. Here's an example. I had John Vroman on the show. He's got this company called Front Row Dads. He talks about helping men become family men with businesses, not businessmen with families. And I asked him a question on the podcast, and he talked about this CD that he got that changed his life. It was from it was some obscure band or something like that. And I found it on Amazon, a signed copy from this band that was able to do it. And I sent that to him as a gift. And like, he got back to me and he's like, call me now. He's like, call me now. And so like, and that was just, you know, I wasn't ever expecting anything from that, but it's like, it just was a fun thing to do because I wanted to build that relationship. So, you know, ask, you know, good follow-up gifts. I'll give another one, Dan. I'm just like, I love just sharing so much, but I do this for guests on my show. I got this idea actually from Joe Polish and Dean Jackson. They talked about lumpy mail. It's like in the direct mail world, the more engaging you can create things. And Joe had made some comments about a direct mail. It was either an idea or something that he did, but they mailed. This is the idea. Yeah, I don't know which one it was, but basically the idea was that they wanted to send someone a letter with really small print, and they sent them a magnifying glass with it to read that small print. And it's like, you don't get stuff like that in the mail. That's fun. Like, that's engaging. Like, you're going to pull out and you're going to remember, even though it was a piece of mail in the day, you're going to remember that somebody sent you a magnifying glass with small print and it was funny. So I got that idea and I created my own version of that. And I send guests 3D glasses. And I create how do I describe this? There's a software I use, or like a little tool online, where it creates like a pixelated graph that is like blue and red. And I can create an encoded message inside of it. So I could say, "Thank you, Dan." And then I send a handwritten note to my guests and I say, I attach these 3D glasses for one reason. One, I appreciate the new lens and perspective that you gave my audience today. And two, I wanted to use it as a way to say thank you. And then I send them a custom URL to go to this graph, and they have to use their 3D glasses to see that it says "Thank you, Dan" on it. So like, all of these things are, things that I like to do for my show to develop real relationships, where it's like, who's sending that stuff? No one's sending that stuff. Who's asking these questions? Nobody's asking those questions. Who's reaching out this way? Nobody's reaching out this way. Like, all those things build relationships that are going to translate into people wanting to work with you and support with you. And I think that at the end of the day, people want to work with good humans. And so if you show up, you don't expect anything, but you're creating an environment where you're adding lots of value to people, that's just how fun, that's just how anybody would want to live their life.
Love it. Love it. I mean, Brandon, this has been an absolute masterclass on connection. Very, very confident there's a ton of value for folks here. Is there anything else, conscious that we've been having this great conversation for a little while, is there anything else you want to throw into the mix? Either another idea, another offer potentially for the audience? Is there anything else you'd love to throw into the mix as we move towards the end of our time together?
That was Dan's polite way of saying, Brandon, you talk a lot. No, I love that. Let me say, I guess I'll leave with like kind of like a more of a foundational thing that's in alignment. It's like, if I go and I look back at any given point of I'll just say my career, and I'm really grateful, blessed to say I've been in some, I'm 25 right now. I turn 26 next month. And it's like, I've had lots of opportunities, but if I look at the opportunities that have come in my life, it's all been because of connections. It's all been because I know it's not something, it's like people say it all the time, but it, like, I truly believe that your life can change with the right connections. And if you have approach, like some of the tools that I've mentioned with you today that allow you to invest in these relationships long-term, they're going to come back to you. And whether or not it's an immediate ROI, you're going to develop these relationships. And it's like, I'm starting to see things that just, I started the podcast. It's been a little bit over a year. And I'm starting to see this echo, a chamber that have happened. It's like, I never expected anything to happen from that, but like now things are happening just because I built a relationship with these people. So anytime that you can invest in connections and relationships and develop a system and a process around it, do it.
Love it. Last question. We always end on a human note. So when you're not building connections, you're not helping your clients build their businesses, you're not doing phenomenal things in the podcast world, what do you do for fun outside of work?
This is a good one. Spike ball. That's been my latest obsession this past year. Maybe I even mentioned it to you last time, Dan, but like, I think so. It sucks because it's winter in Wisconsin. So it's a little bit harder to play spike ball outside right now, but that's been my biggest thing. Make homemade kombucha. That's another weird thing that I'm always into, is I'm like experimenting with different flavoring and exploding some bottles from overcarbonation. So those are two things that I have weird interests in: spike ball and kombucha.
Well, after many interviews, you are the first person to mention either spike ball or kombucha as an answer to that question. So your weirdness is delightful and awesome.
Perfect. Love it.
Brandon, it has been such a pleasure to be with you. Really, really beautiful. I mean, in half an hour, you've added just an immense amount of value here. Exceptionally grateful for your insights and your wisdom and what you've achieved so early on, and can't wait to see what you do in the future. So such a pleasure to be with you, Brandon.
Thanks so much, Dan. I really appreciate that.